are listening to part 15 of our 20-part series, Marvelous Mints, The Wise Woman Way with Susan Weed at Time Monk Radio. Hello, Susan. Welcome back to Time Monk Radio.
Hi, Jim and I hope you went out and had some sushi last week and said, hey, look at that. There's a shiso leaf right there.
Now I can identify it.
Yeah, you can identify it and picked it up and smelled it and looked at it. And I find the green shiso that is frequently used for decorative purposes, and especially the curly-leaved shisos, can have almost a soapy kind of citronella taste. I believe that there are more oils in the green form than there are in the purple form. And that's, in a way, almost the opposite of what we're going to find about the plant that we're looking at this week, which is bee balm. And my first encounter with bee balm wound up with me looking like Bozo the Clown. I was in somebody's garden teaching, and we got up to move from one part of the garden to another, probably because the sun had shifted, and we wanted to stay in the sun. And I unknowingly and unthinkingly and rudely, I must admit, walked into a bee path. And the bees, as they're coming in and out of their hive, actually do have like a little bee highway. And they do get offended if you just walk through their little bee highway. Not like it's so crowded with bees, like rush hour in L.A. or anything. But they know it's there. And so this bee collided with my nose, and it did a bee-like thing, which is it stung me. Odd. The nose. And I'm, of course, jumping up and down and yelling, ow, 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 ow. And the woman whose garden it was came over and with her fingernail quickly was able to scrape the bee stinger out of my nose and turned around and said, here's some bee balm, and picked this beautiful red flower. And I mean red, redder than geranium red, really red flower. And I kind of looked at it, uncomprehending, and she as much as stuffed it in my mouth. She said, chew on it, right? And I chewed on it, and then I kind of looked at her. She said, spit it into your hand and then put it on your nose. So I did. I spit it in my hand and put this big mass of like red and green on my nose. Somebody actually took a picture. I had to laugh. I did, of course, continue class. But I can say from personal experience that bee balm definitely counters the pain and the irritation of bee stings. Well, it's a marvelous mint. What would we expect? Marvelous mints are always going to help us when we have been stung by something and when there is an inflamed reaction. The genus Monarda was named for the Spanish physician and botanist Nicolas Monardes, who lived in the middle of the 16th century and authored one of the first European books on American plants. It was translated into English in 1577 with the title Joyful News Out of the New Found World. Well, we got to admit that the joyful news about Monarda, and especially Monarda didyma, was not news to the Native Americans. Native Americans, especially those who live where I do here in the eastern part of the United States, had been using bee balms for a long, long time, as people all over the world have gravitated to, found, and used the marvelous mints that grow where they do. The white settlers found Monarda didyma growing on the banks of the Oswego River near Lake Ontario, and the refreshing drink that they brewed from it became known as Oswego tea. After the Boston Tea Party, Oswego tea became quite fashionable indeed to drink, and it is still used in herbal medicine today primarily for digestive complaints, because, again, isn't that what we think of with the mint family? Now, we were starting talking about the differences between the purple-leaved and the green-leaved shiso. And I said that I thought that the green-leaved shiso had more volatile oils with stronger tasting, was harder in a way to use, but of course more medicinal. Whereas with the bee balms, the brighter colors, I think, tend to have less oils. The two primary wild forms that we find are the Monarda didyma, which is the Oswego tea, which is that bright red blossom, and the purple Monarda. And the wild purple Monarda is not very bright purple. As a matter of fact, it's almost mauve. It's a very light lilac-y purple. But that is the one that has all of the volatile oils in it. And if you go out to buy Monarda, if you say, hey, well, I want some bee balm, they will probably, 99.5% of the time, they will say you a cultivar, which is actually a cross between the purple and the red. And what you get is not the purple, which is kind of a small plant, very prone to moldy overgrowth, with a very sharp, strong smell, and not the red one, which is a beautiful, tall, sturdy plant with nice aroma, but not a lot of aroma. Instead, you get a kind of mid-range plant that doesn't have very much mold on it, and it's a kind of interesting magenta purplish color, but it has volatile oils of the wild purple one. As a matter of fact, when I harvest the wild purple one or the cultivars, somebody gave me one of the cultivars, and I have spent 15 years now trying to get it out of my garden. Very difficult to get rid of Monarda. When I do harvest it and use it, I use it as oregano. It has so much volatile oil and so much of the volatile oils in that oregano part of the family that I just consider it an oregano, unlike the red bee balm. Thymol is one of the components of the oils in the Monardas, and especially as you move from the reds to the purples. Now, let's stop just for a moment and remind you that we are not talking about bergamot orange. Bergamot or bergamot, orange citrus bergania, is a member of the citrus family with oranges and limes and lemons and so on. And it is not a mint at all. The bergamot orange or bergamot has a very powerful oil in its rind, and that oil is extracted and is one of the most widely used oils in the perfume and toiletry industries, and of course is the main flavoring of Earl Grey tea, named after a real Earl Grey indeed. Like all of the mints, we think of Monarda as being a wonderful ally for the pulmonary system. And in fact, all throughout the United States where the Monardas grew, that is just how the native people used it. The aerial parts, fresh or dried, used as a tea, a compress, a soak, liniment, so many ways to make it. I make bergamot flowering top vinegar, and I use both the strong flavored light purple one, the cultivated one, and the red, the true red Oswego tea, the Monarda didyma, to make vinegar. So I get 3 different vinegars. They all taste really, really wonderful, and they're a great way to get more of those mint antioxidants into our diets and into our lives. The Monardas tend to grow in clumps. They are beautiful plants to grow. They like some mints, prefer wetter rather than drier places. And when in a place that is to their liking, they will grow so thickly that no other plant can grow there. Seeing a big patch of blazing red Monarda didyma, big enough to not be covered by a sheet for a queen-size bed, is one of my cherished memories. I get to see that patch every summer when I visit my friend Gretchen up at her herb hill, and she looks at it and she says, it was just a little patch when I started, but I have loved that patch so much that it's gotten bigger and bigger every single year. Monarda fistulosa is generally the botanical name that we give to the wild light purple Monarda. But there's also Monarda punctata, which is called horse mint. And it actually looks a bit different than the other Monardas. The Monardas are often used in gardens because they do have such an unusual and rather exotic look to them. Now, I mentioned that the purple one is smallish, and by smallish what I mean is only about knee-high, and that the red one was taller, and by taller I mean that it can get up to shoulder-high. So these are pretty big plants that we're talking about, and they come up, and you recall that the mints have two ways of flowering, that they can flower up the top, and that is spearmint, like a spear at the top, or they can flower in little bracelets or necklaces, ruffles around where the leaves join the stem, and that is peppermint. So the spearmint flowers at the end like lavender, and the peppermint flowers around the stalk like motherwort. And the Monardas do both. How do they do both? They come right up to the top, and they have their flower at the top, but the flower at the top is a whorl as though it were around a stalk, and occasionally it will push up a bit of stalk and have another flower. And the flowers are so big that usually you can just get your hand around it. We're not talking a small flower here, so when you see these rather large plants with these sometimes two-headed large flowers in the breeze and the wonderful scent coming off of them, you know that you have really found something amazing. The wild bee balm is also called Indian plume and mountain balm, and some of the mountain balms can get even taller than shoulder height. And there are, in fact, 16 different species of Monarda that grow in North America, some of which are annuals and some of which are perennials. I'm hoping to meet Monarda citriodora. Oh, citriodora indeed. Lemon mint is found in sweet soils of the warmer states, Florida, South Carolina, Missouri, Texas, and Mexico. That's one plant I would like to meet, since I love this genus anyhow. Now, we just heard an origin story that said that the settlers found this by the Oswego River, but who lived there was the Oswego Indians. And so other stories say that the reason it's called Oswego tea is because of the Oswego Indians, who did indeed introduce this tea to the white settlers. The Shakers were very keen on Monarda didyma, and they thought that the tea was all that was needed to treat a cold or a sore throat. One of the ways that they used it was to toss the dried flower heads into boiling water, take the boiling water off the heat, and make a tent. I'm sure you've seen that in some old movie, and maybe you've even wondered about trying it. It's actually quite good for your complexion, as well as being a wonderful way to open up your nose, open up your throat, and open up your lungs. So how do we do that? We take a smallish pot, We boil some water in it. When the water has come to a boil, we turn off the fire. We throw some Monarda flower tops in that, and then we drape a towel over our head and put our head over the steam rising from the pan so that the towel traps it, and we not only get a wonderful facial, but we breathe more easily as well. From colonial days until the present, Monarda has also been cherished in the garden because it attracts butterflies and hummingbirds. Remember I said at the beginning that you were going to want to grow Monarda when I got done telling you about it? Well, I certainly hope that you do, because it is a plant that has all of the attributes of the mints, plus this wonderful color that it gives to the garden. I find the Monardas very useful in interplantings as well. We've been seeing that the mints are really marvelous in terms of the fact that insects do not care much for them. We were just talking last week about how the goats won't eat the shiso, and that when pastured animals are forced to eat the shiso or any mint, in fact, most animals don't like the mints and leave them alone. And when they're forced to eat those, that bad things happen to them. So I think the same thing is very much true with insects. The insects like to avoid the mints. And when we can grow something as beautiful as the Monardas in our garden, we not only get the pleasure of seeing that, but we get that extra added quality that it helps prevent insects from our other plants. A couple of years ago, my Live Out Apprentice group gave me a beautiful willow tree. And it was a very intense fencing job to fence the willow in enough to protect it from the goats, because the goats absolutely adore willow. And that willow tree, because it was a small willow, you can't transplant a big tree, of course, would have been nothing more than chewed up by the goats if we hadn't done a fence and then another fence, and they still tried to push it in. And after the willow tree had grown for a couple of years, and of course we planted it in a wet place, I noticed that it looked like it was being attractive to various insects that I did not want to come around. And so when I went to visit my friend Gretchen Gould at her herb hill, I asked her if I could dig up some of her Monarda didyma. And she was very, very happy to have me do that. And I went out and I sat with the Monarda and sat in the sun there. It likes to grow in very sunny locations. And I talked to it, and it said, oh, my goodness, well, of course, just dig a bunch of me up, Don't try to take one from here and one from there. Take a whole, bit of the patch. It really, showed me very clearly that I wasn't to, take a plant off here and take a plant off there, that I was to take, that they really do like to be in community, and that they would be much happier and grow better if I did that. Now, one of the reasons I was asking was because the year previous to that, I had also asked Gretchen if it would be okay if I took some of her Monarda home to try in my garden. And I was kind of timid about it at this time, and so I did. I took one from over this edge of the patch and then one from over that edge of the patch, because I didn't want to disturb things too much. And I put them in a wet enough place, but I didn't put them in a sunny enough place, and they weren't really happy, and they didn't survive their first winter. So here I am back at the big bergamot patch, sitting there and saying, I really want you to come and live with me. And now I think I have a better, sunnier place for you. And tell me more about how I can take you home. And that's what I did. I had a spading fork. And I dug down. It's a perennial plant that comes again and again and again, and it's a very long-lived perennial if it gets enough sun and in moist enough place. And I lifted up a clump of it and took it home and planted it by that willow tree, and it definitely took hold and was thriving very, very well when the cold came on. And I expect it not only to be happily there next spring, but a much bigger patch as well. As you know, because we've been talking together for many, many months now, I think that herbal teas are swell. Herbal teas are just great, but I don't drink very much herbal tea. What I tend to drink is nourishing herbal infusion. And we don't make infusion from any aromatic herb. So we're not going to make an infusion of Monarda. We would make a honey of it. We would make a vinegar of it. We would make a tea of it. We would mix it with other herbs in a tea. Those are all wonderful ways for using it, but I do admit to using a small amount of Monarda in my comfrey leaf infusion. Here's what gives. Comfrey leaf infusion is certainly an important infusion. And one of the strange things about comfrey is that it is both astringent, in other words, it dries surfaces, and mucilaginous, it makes surfaces slippery. And when you put something in your mouth that is both drying and slippery at the same time, it makes your brain a little crazy, because your brain is trying to decide which one it is. So I found that if I put in one stalk of Monarda didyma, and we cut the plant about halfway up, so I've got about maybe 18 to 20 inches of stalk with leaves and then the flower at the top, and we hang that in groups of 2 or 3 to dry, and then store it whole in a brown paper bag. And one stalk of that goes in with 1 ounce of the dried comfrey leaf when I'm making my infusion. It's actually not even enough to taste. Nobody has ever said to me, "What mint is this in your comfrey?" And yet many people have said to me, "Your comfrey infusion tastes so much better than mine. What do you do?" And I say, you are tasting the secret ingredient in my comfrey infusion, which is Monarda didyma, Oswego tea, an herb that adds to what the comfrey is doing. By being soothing, the comfrey can help to counter inflammation. And as we know, as we're learning, all of the mints are fantastic for countering inflammation. So adding that wee bit of Oswego tea to my comfrey really just mellows it out. Is this a plant that you're at all familiar with? Have you ever seen a Monarda or grown Oswego tea?
I am not familiar with the Oswego variety, but I do have Monarda fistulosa here and has a very nice oregano, and I can relate to the bees as well that love to hang out with the Monarda.
The bees do love to hang out with the bee balm. So you have the fistulosa, the purple one.
I do. And it's delightful. It just grows outside my side door here, and it's just a beautiful plant. I love it.
It is such a striking plant. The salvias in the mint, we talked about sage, the garden sage, the salvia that's medicinal. But many salvias have been cultivated to have enormous spikes of flowers. But still in all, none of them match the stateliness of the Monardas, huh?
Yeah, mine is, we like to call it the Empress out there because it is so stately. And we have to laugh because the bees, we get these enormous bees on it, and they seem to become weighted down with all the pollen. And we call them our guard bees because they hang out by the door. And instead of having a guard dog, we have guard bees.
There is something about the Monarda that is so attractive to the bees. Now, it is true that all of the plants in the mint family are quite attractive to bees. What about your lemon balm? Do the bees like that?
I don't notice that one as much. When I'm out there, I see it, but the Monarda I see more often just because of its location.
Right. And because the flowers are more eye level to us.
Yes.
Yeah, so that we don't have to bend over to see it. But if you go and sit with your lemon balm during a summer day, you will see busy, busy, busy bees in all of the lemon balm flowers. I've been saying that the insects don't like the scented plants, but let's rephrase that. Insects that can be harmful don't seem to like the scented plants, but the bees adore the scented plants. Right? So we often talk about, if we're going to plant a garden that's going to attract bees, that it would be these scented plants, right? The lavenders, the bergamots, right? All of these wonderful things. I'm told that bees come especially to the tulsi as well. I have not noticed a lot of bee activity on the shiso. Now, obviously, they're getting over there when I'm not watching. But and again, the monardas are just so striking about what's going on with the bees out there, and that oregano scent to the fistulosa, it's good enough to use on pizza. Truly,
we have
in
used
many
the
gardens.
leaves on. Yeah, I'm sorry. We have used the leaves as oregano. They are very fragrant and they taste delicious.
They do. And if you're trying to go to a garden center and buy an oregano plant, they're probably going to sell you the wild oregano of North America, which is virtually scentless. And people get very disappointed because they want to grow oregano, and I say, well, just don't bother with growing oregano. Grow Monarda fistulosa instead.
Yes, that's an excellent one.
Yeah, pretty plant, easy to grow. Once you get it established, it's going to be there forever and ever. And just a couple of leaves will give an enormous oregano scent to your soup or your stew or whatever it is that you are making. So once again, we have come to the end of our show. Next week, we are going to be looking at an old-fashioned plant, and that is hyssop. And it is so old-fashioned that it was actually talked about in the Bible. So far in our walk through the marvelous mints, we have looked at plants that are, if not familiar to you, familiar to hundreds of thousands of other people around the world, because we're looking at mints all over the world, and all of them in very current use. In other words, you could go out and buy almost all of the plants that we're talking about. But the plant that we're going to talk about next week, hyssop, is not only an old-fashioned plant, but it's one that has fallen very much into disuse. So we'll have to decide together next week whether it's reasonable that people don't use hyssop anymore or whether we're really missing out on a great, marvelous mint. Come and visit me at SusanWeed.com. You will find over 5,000 pages of free herbal information. So he said, how could you have 5,000 pages? I said, well, we do a weekly electronic magazine, an e-zine. And because we do that and archive them and have been doing that for, 12 or 13 years now, that provides a lot of information. And as you probably know, I do a blog talk show. And we also record that blog talk show, and that's podcast. So you can also find links to that at SusanWeed.com. And if you're interested in my books, I have New Menopausal Years, The Wise Woman Way, Wise Woman Herbal for the Childbearing Year. My latest book, Down There, Sexual and Reproductive Health, The Wise Woman Way. My Big Green Herbal, Healing Wise, and Breast Cancer, Breast Health, ! Then please come and visit me at the Wise Woman Bookshop.com. You'll also find information there about my correspondence courses, my online courses, where I'm going to be next year, and I'm going to be out on the West Coast. As a matter of fact, I'm going to be doing a lot of stuff out on the West Coast. And I think I'm going to be in Kansas as well. Oh, Toto, we're going back to Kansas. Yes. So come and visit and share the green blessings. Thank you so much for having me here on Time Monk Radio, Gemini.
Thanks so much, Susan. This concludes part 15 of our 20-part series, Marvelous Myths, The Wise Woman Way, with Susan Weed at Time Monk Radio.